Well, we come together again for another lecture. If you recall, we are in a series on anti-aging and longevity. We started out at about 1996, a article by a group in Japan that found out in Okinawa that they had the longest living population of all the countries that the United Nations carries information on. After that, we found out that in Okinawa, they found out they were an important group of people. And rather than rely on Japan to do work, they founded a foundation in Okinawa just to study why they are longer living. And one of the most important things they found out is that in Japan, they assumed that the Okinawans ate rice primarily and everything else around that. But in fact, it was sweet potatoes. Then we went to the fact that National Geographic has studied approximately 100 countries that through the United Nations it's responsible for health. And in National Geographic, they pointed out blue zones, which superficially I shared with you. But this time, we're going to go on another National Geographic issue about living longer and better, because in this blue zones, they find out that people live longer, but have better quality of life. And this time we're going to go into details that I hope that you will think about. What could you institute in your own life that would incorporate some of the things that we will find out that were active in the blue zones. Also, Life Extensions magazine has come out with the fact that William Shatner on television is 91 years old, and how very active he is, and apparently in excellent health. And I've pointed out that we've focused on this on several lectures because it's 100% of the population. And in fact, if you will go back to the history of North America, that the Spanish were over here first, and that they were down in the Central America and South America looking for gold and silver. However, Ponte de Leon went to Florida looking for the fountain of youth. So this is something that has captured the interest of human beings for a very long time. And Ponte de Leon felt like the fountain of youth was more important than silver and gold. And I hope when we go through this that you will focus on things that you can incorporate in your life. And if you go on to Google and go for sayings of Hippocrates, who's given the title of being the father of Western medicine out of ancient Greece, you will find out that he had two very important statements that you will find are repeated in these blue zones. And I quote him, he says, if we could provide to the patient or the individual the optimal nutrition and exercise, comma, not too much, not too little, comma, we'd have found the safest pathway to good health. And beneath this is wrote, let your food be your medicine and your medicine your food. And you will find this is over and over again in all these blue zones that the United Nations has identified. And so now we'll go to the PowerPoint presentation and go into some of the details of these that I hope you will take notes and give some thought to what you can do through particularly diet and reasonable exercise, that you can add years of quality life to the time that you're going to be in this dimension. So we'll go to the PowerPoint now. Here you see the slide that we are starting out each of these lectures on longevity and quality of life that the United Nations, World Health Organization of the United Nations calls the blue zone phenomenon. And they have found places that we will go into detail now about where they have people living into the 90s and over 100. Fact is, more centurions in these areas than any other area. And I hope that you will be thinking about what can I do that's reasonable with my lifestyle and activity that I can incorporate that is present in these areas. And one of the things that you will notice in common of all these areas is that they are either an island or a peninsula or an isolated area where all the people are kind of doing the same thing and have not been urbanized like in the big cities. So we'll go to the second slide. Now, this is the cover of another issue of the National Geographic that is going into details on the blue zones, and that what they have found are areas where there's the longest living and healthiest populations. And we have not an island or a peninsula in the United States that we will go to, but an area that's somewhat isolated of a religious group that follows some of the things these other areas have done that are more isolated. One of the first blue zones is Sardinia, Italy. That's an island. And on that island in Ogliastra region is primarily shepherds. And this is their diet profile, which you'll see over and over again, that the plant-based diet of these people is about 67%. As you see, it's made up of vegetables, of fruits, of legumes, of grains, and then sugar, which is also from primarily sugar cane and sugar beets. And Sardinia has wonderful longevity and quality of life. And one of the common things they do is have sheep milk, and they have meat no more than once a week, and it's primarily at festivals. In Sardinia, they make their own bread from whole grains. They eat a lot of flava beans, lard, and what the garden produces. In the garden, there are high incidence of zucchini squash, tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant. They have coffee and a certain cookie they call passina, which is compressed raisins, grape juice, almonds, fentanyl, which I wasn't familiar with, but it's a seed. And if you Google it, you'll find out there are 11 health benefits from fentanyl seeds. In Sardinia, wine is common with the meal, and there are almost no meat in the winter. And this island is relatively isolated since Roman times. And I think this isolation rather than urbanization is important because we're a herd animal and kind of do what those around us do. Another blue zone is Ikaria, Greece, and this is another island that's isolated from the urban area. And their diet is 85% plant-based. And if you'll notice, as they've gone in and analyzed it, that the greens, collards and spinach and other big leafy vegetables, about 17% of their diet. Other vegetables are 20%. They eat about 9% potatoes. They eat legumes, they're grains. And of course, the pasta comes from grains, and the fruits, and they're heavy in olive oil. And so meat is no more than about 5% of their diet. And I always like to point out that your meats have certain nutrients that is almost impossible to find in plants. However, you don't need a lot of it. And of course, they eat a significant amount of fish being on an island. We mentioned their olive oil is about 4 tablespoons a day, and this decreases heart disease. And studies have indicated that there's about a 50% reduced mortality in populations that have at least 4 tablespoons of olive oil from the olive oil plant tree. In addition, the wild greens are high in vitamin A and the carotenoids and minerals. The potatoes are a big thing in Greece, and they tend to lower blood pressure, and lower the glucose levels against diabetes, and is anti-inflammatory. They eat a lot of black-eyed peas on Ikaria, Greece. Peas have protein, plant protein, fiber, and this in major studies have shown to decrease incidence of cancer, diabetes, and the atherosclerosis of the main vessels of the heart. They eat a lot of chickpeas, which is a source of unsaturated fat. Chickpeas are used as a snack food instead of some of the things like we have in this country. And they add chickpeas to a lot of other dishes. Lemons are high in their diet. They even peel the oils that I remember a French paper saying that there are oils in the lemon and orange citrus fruits that are particularly protective to the lens of the eye for certain wavelengths from the sun that tend to promote clouding of the lens. Lemons are active in reducing blood glucose and being anti-diabetic, which is virtually a silent epidemic, according to the World Health Organization, across all the countries because of general obesity. Everybody's eating better and putting on extra weight, which promotes diabetes too. They drink herbal teas in Greece, and there are multiple phytonutrient molecules in your teas. In fact, this is one of the big things at Paracelsus. They ran into conflict with the physicians of his day as he made teas out of leaves, bark, roots, tubers, blossoms, and then he would burn the residual from making the teas and have the patient swallow that. And he was getting results. That was kind of Paracelsus' version of ancient dietary supplementation. Another thing in Greece is they drink a lot of coffee. And that's interesting because the Harvard longitudinal study in nurses and physicians has come out that if you have 5 or 6 cups of coffee a day, you cut the incidence of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and also prostate cancer significantly. And if you even drink 10 cups a day, you get another 15 or 20% benefit. Coffee is kind of a version of using the coffee bean to make what you do with the leaves for a tea. In Greece, they also, for their sweetener, it's primarily honey. And they make feta cheese from goat milk. And there's worldwide research going on about the contributions to health that the bacteria in the large bowel make. And this supports a flora of very healthy bacteria by eating feta cheese, and studying this in other studies that you can find on PubMed. This is anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory to support a better flora of bacteria in your large bowel. The next blue zone is a peninsula in Costa Rica, Nicoya, and again, their diet profile is 67% plant-based, and you'll see the vegetables are 14%, the fruits, the legumes, the grains are 26%, and they're more fish and poultry than other meats, and it's only 5%. They eat some eggs and some dairy, but this is the type of diet that you should give some thought to in regard to your own dietary things. Now, in Costa Rica, they have staple bananas, papayas, and tortillas made with corn masa and a significant amount of rice, just like the Asians. It's very common in Costa Rica to have lots of beans, onions, garlic, tomatoes, cheese, cilantro, and even jalapenos. And a staple in Costa Rica is a mixture of rice and beans, which they call gallo pinto, and it's the most common dish that for people to eat. Everything else is kind of rotated around that, and this is a good basic source of nutrition. They eat a lot of food from the garden and from fruit trees because it's a tropical area. But again, notice that this is a peninsula away from the urbanized major cities. Now, in the United States, we don't have a peninsula or an island where we have the population with the highest longevity, but it's a zone or in California around the base of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And their plant-based diet is about 81%. Vegetables are very high, 33%. They eat a lot of soybeans and soy products and legumes. They incorporate nuts and seeds, grains, and meat and poultry is only about 4% of their diet. They do have a small amount of dairy, and they have some fish and a small amount of eggs. And it's interesting, 3 times I was invited to the Loma Linda annual alumni weekend for the university there to share the lectures that came out of the decade I spent with Carrington Laboratories studying the key dietary component that's in aloe vera leaf gel. And I had heard that they had a longitudinal study of Seventh-day Adventists. And so I began looking for it, and I couldn't find it at the medical school. I couldn't find it at the nursing school. And finally, they sent me to the public health department. And when I asked for the longitudinal study, they kind of smiled knowingly and went over to the file cabinet, and they pulled out a 3-page stapled together bibliography that went back to the 1930s. And in fact, it was just made up of the titles and the authors and the citations for the journals way back to the 1930s up to the current time. And they are the healthiest population in the United States in regard to longevity and quality of life in their later years. And you can see how high their plant-based diet is. And they will, if you're around them very long, they'll not only quote Genesis 1:29 that Yahweh says, I give you every herb bearing seed upon the face of the earth, and every tree yielding seed to you, it shall be your meat. I have inquired of rabbis that not just a routine rabbi, but those that study the ancient scriptures and said, is this exactly what is in the oldest scrolls and things of the Hebrew scriptures? And they kind of smile and they say, well, no, for you it shall be meat, is that in 1611, at the time of the King James version of the Bible, in its translation, they were trying to emphasize that most meals are built around the meat. But if you go back to the original Hebrew, the term there is more like sustenance. For you, it shall be sustenance. And they say, now that's not as poetic and doesn't get across like the use of the four-letter word meat, but that the original scripture says that the tree-bearing seeds, for you it shall be sustenance, a much larger term. Also in Daniel 1, they will lay the story on you that it's the reason so many Adventists are either vegetarians or vegans when they were taken as slaves to Babylonia, that the king noticed how robust and muscular the young Jewish boys were. And he said he wanted them in his service, and he invited them to come and eat at the king's table to have the finest wines and meats from the kingdom. And they said, no, we just want vegetables and water. And he insisted, oh, you must have the best, come in. And also they did a little study. And lo and behold, they found out that the vegetables and water, that they had more endurance, strength, and recover from fatigue. And so they allowed them to do it. And this is still part of the tradition. So they formed sort of a psychological or sociological island, different from all around them, because they're not into fast foods and a lot of fried different things that are oftentimes built around various meats. Now, the Adventists are noted for eating a lot of avocados. For if they do eat meat, it'd be salmon. And I have checked the profile of cultivated salmon versus wild salmon, and it's interesting that the wild salmon, foraging off of the ocean bottom and what they catch in the ocean, has a much different nutritional profile than salmon that are fed a diet made primarily from grains. And so you should know that. Also, the Adventists are big on nuts, oftentimes having different types of nuts. And those that have studied nuts separately said that having nuts 5 times a week in these papers say is probably good for about 3 more years and of life and reduce chronic disease. The nuts lower cholesterol and blood pressure. And of course, this reduces the incidence of atherosclerosis, or material building up in the primary arteries that lead to strokes and heart attacks. And this is anti-inflammation and reversal of diabetes. In fact, if you follow this kind of diet, you will find that you have a lower incidence of obesity. There are a lot of beans eaten by the Adventists, and we have in one of our lectures about how important the beans and legumes and the seeds are. And they eat a lot of soy products and a lot of peas. And again, the seeds provide for the food supply and to protect the little sleeping embryo for the next generation of that plant. And it has a protective coat around the seeds and beans and peas. And it's a biopolymer, or resistant to too much moisture, too dry, too hot, too cold, and we can, the way it protects the food supply and the little embryo, that when we eat the full grain or seed, we get some of those protective benefits for our own body. The Adventists eat significant more oatmeal than other groups, and this has a good balance of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, iron, and the B vitamins, and it's a source of fiber, which is good for the GI tract. They tend to eat whole wheat, which is low calorie for the amount of carbohydrate there, and it's high fiber. And they drink a lot of water, which flushes out toxins through the kidneys. And if you're drinking a lot of water, you don't drink a lot of beverages that can be stressful to good health. The Adventists also shun smoking, alcohol, shellfish, and different preparations of what meat they do eat. Is they want it to be more like kosher of the Jewish, that it should be properly clean, whatever little meat they do eat. And as I pointed out, I sought the Adventist longevity study and found out it was a list of papers of research that had been done by medical scientists starting back in the 1930s. And I don't know where my copy of that is now, but they're not a peninsula or island, but they're a group that philosophically and religiously follow a different type of diet than the rest of the country that seems to eat what they're promoted on television. Now, we had previously mentioned Okinawa, and that the study was done in 1949 by the Japanese, and that their diets in 1949, right after World War II, were about 87% plant-based. And as I pointed out, once they decided that they were an important population, and they established their own Okinawan-based longevity foundation, they found out that the Japanese coming in from Tokyo had made an a priori mistake just assuming the Okinawans ate a lot of rice like they did in the mainland. But in fact, if you'll notice that first circle there for 1949, 67% of the volume of their food was actually sweet potatoes. However, as I mentioned before, I did a tour of Japan, and I presented a lecture in Tokyo to this group that did the study in 1949, and Dr. Katani had since died. And the new director pulled me to the side after it was over and said, we found out we not only lost World War II, but we gained hamburgers, hot dogs, fried chicken, and said that the population of the young people in Okinawa now had dropped to only 71% plant-based, and that they were eating a whole lot less sweet potatoes and more of the fast food type thing. And the brown rice, yes, they have always been that, but it's brown rice is only 12% of their diet for their major caloric intake. Now, what is common to all the blue zones? They're high percent plant-based diets, and they're low in meat consumption, and they tend to be isolated populations away from urbanized cities. As I pointed out, all but the Loma Linda group in California, which is the middle of California, is kind of a religious philosophical island, and they turn against the fast food type of food that's so common across the country. Now, I think it's very important because I attended a conference where the Cleveland Clinic presented, and they pointed out that a number of years ago, they had an individual with such bad coronary artery atherosclerosis that the surgeons refused to do the surgery. They said there's nothing to go in there and bypass around. And so they sent them back to the medical department, and they started what is, you can go on the web and find out, the Dean Ornish diet. And the Dean Ornish diet is very high in plant intake. And to improve compliance, the Dean Ornish diet lets you have 1 day a week that he calls the holiday, and you can eat anything you want to on that 1 day, but then you have essentially 6 days of a vegetarian diet. Well, at the Cleveland Clinic, they have also Dr. Esselstein, and he is more rigorous in his dietary management, and he gives them no holiday off, and it doesn't even allow plant oils like olive oil and canola oil. You want to avoid the oils in his diet. And at this conference, they showed this original patient and some others about before and after angiograms. And the angiograms, they put a catheter up through your leg up into the heart, and with the x-ray machines synchronized, they inject contrast media that they catch it flowing through the arteries of the heart, and they can tell the degree of narrowing. And they pointed out incredible reductions in atherosclerosis from not only the Dean Ornish diet, but especially the Esselstein diet. So now we have gone into the details of the blue zones that the World Health Organization has identified over the globe. And I hope as we've gone through that, you have made notes to your mind that there's things that you can do that if you'll stop and think about it, food doesn't have untoward, generally speaking, side effects or toxicities like pharmaceuticals. And your diet choices is, I have pointed out before, and I say again, is the ultimate expression of independence and freedom. Of nobody can determine what you're going to eat and how much, like you can do yourself. And I hope in this series you have noted things that you can do. And just like Hippocrates pointed out, that you should have not too much, not too little in regard to the diet. If you remember, the Okinawans follow a statement by Confucius saying, quit eating when you're about 80% full. In other words, don't overeat. And if you don't overeat, you won't promote obesity, which is, as some say, virtually a silent epidemic across all nations of type 2 diabetes that is influenced by excessive caloric intake in regard to the amount of physical exercise you do. And a reasonable amount of exercise is walking a mile at a brisk pace at least 3 times a week. That doesn't require membership to a place of exercise. And in these areas of the blue zones, a lot of the exercise people get is in their daily task of farming or ranching or fishing. and that this is considered one of the better forms of exercise, not going to a place with machines and certain artificial exercise activity, but integrating it into your daily life. So with that, we will come to the end of this details of the blue zone areas that the World Health Organization has identified. And we'll have one more lecture at the end of this to point out the benefits that we're seeing with a small research project that we're into at Wellness Quest. And with that, we'll bring us to an end.